Just ahead on Washington to Washington, we continue our look at clean energy with the debate over where future clean energy projects should land.
So there's an ideal place on the ridgetop where the wind is the strongest.
When a large wind farm proposal came to the backyards of one county in eastern Washington, some residents protested.
The Tri-City C.A.R.E.S has had a number of concerns with this project from the very beginning.
While others welcomed the potential work.
Just the money that our members will be making, 2.5 years, 1,000 construction workers on this project at its peak.
Off the coast of Washington, a debate over the prospects of offshore wind.
Especially in winter months, when other resources like solar or wind are not as good, offshore wind in particular is actually perfect.
If offshore wind projects are put here and it causes economic harm to our commercial and recreational fishery, they don't have a lot of room. They're not making a lot of profit.
Our primary concern is what it might do to the overall ecosystem.
Despite concerns over offshore development, tribes look to become energy independent on their own.
My goal is to be 100% off-grid within 10 years. It's a big goal, but I think it's achievable.
And a visit to the Federal Pacific Northwest National Laboratory's new grid storage launchpad.
All right, 1, 2, 3.
As researchers work to capture wind and solar energy when the winds aren't blowing and the sun isn't shining.
We have seen dramatic growth in the energy storage industry over the last 5 years.
The leadership that's being shown here is going to lead the way for the rest of the world as well.
From the capital of Washington State to the capital of the United States, this is Washington to Washington. Hello and welcome to Washington. I'm Jennifer Huntley in Washington State. There is no question we will need more energy in the near future, given the increasing demand from data centers, AI, and all the technology we rely on in our daily lives. Along with the growing need, there are those looming deadlines set by Washington State's Clean Energy Transformation Act. All energy must be carbon-free by 2045. So what will be the dominant energy source of the future? We ask that question and more in the second episode of our series on clean energy. Our first show focused on the distribution system, those transmission lines, both across the state and the country.
The transmission lines are kind of the highway system for our electricity.
And the vital need to update them to produce more energy.
It'd be like if we were trying to do all of our commerce today over the 2-lane highways that we had in the 1950s. It just wouldn't be possible.
We also heard from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council about the work of the council on future energy planning and the challenges of predicting how much energy the region will need and where it will all come from.
We're going to be looking at a pretty different world where we've got a lot of potential load growth, not sure how big it's going to be, and a mix of new resources that we'll have to figure out.
And we explored the ongoing debate over hydropower, which supplies most of our energy in Washington State, but raises questions about the impact of dams on salmon.
Despite a lot of time and effort and money spent over the last decades, we haven't been able to figure out how to make salmon coexist with these dams.
You want to have reliable energy when you need it the most. Hydropower has been there for the region.
Meanwhile, Governor Bob Ferguson has made it clear he will focus on data centers and their impact on power in Washington State. Recently, he signed an executive order that forms a work group to study how data centers impact Washington State's economy and energy use. Now our focus is turning to next generation clean energy and the potential for it in Washington State, as well as what a future clean energy workforce looks like. We'll begin with wind energy, both on land and water. Since Washington State needs to phase out fossil fuels, it seems like one important piece of the clean energy pie. But like most policy decisions, that depends on who you ask.
Just to kind of orient you, we're on top of Jump Off Joe Butte and looking to the north.
A windy ridgetop in Benton County offers spectacular views of the valley below where the Yakima, Snake, and Columbia rivers converge. It is high above the valley floor and a prime spot for wind.
So there's an ideal place on the ridgetop where the wind is the strongest.
The wind turbines already here were built over a 10-year period by a company called Energy Northwest. But if Scout Clean Energy gets its way, in the future, more turbines could extend along this ridgetop and beyond.
All this generation here is all committed, and we're looking at shortages coming up. And so that's where this project fits in.
Dave Kobus is a senior project manager for Scout Clean Energy. The company is headquartered in Boulder, Colorado, but has more than 50 wind and solar projects in development across the United States. Kobus has lived in the Tri-Cities for 38 years and developed the first wind turbine project here. He has been at the forefront of Scout Energy's multi-year permitting process and its efforts to build the largest clean energy project in Washington state history.
A project of this size would typically power a fairly large metropolitan area. In this particular area, it's the solar potential that creates wind. You get areas that are heating up and hot air rises. And so cooler air has to come in to replace that hot air. And so when we're developing these projects, we're looking for those areas that the landscape creates those factors.
That landscape includes willing landowners who will lease parts of their property to Scout Energy for the turbines. Those leases were first negotiated way back in 2016. When the wind farm was originally proposed by Scout in 2021, more than 200 wind turbines and 3 solar arrays would have generated more than 1,100 megawatts of electricity. That's enough to power about 1 million homes. The project is backed by former Governor Jay Inslee and labor unions in Benton County that see the potential for high-paying jobs installing the new turbines.
All the money's going to stay right here locally. All of our construction workers live right here locally, so all the money goes right back into the community.
The union was ready to get started.
Hopefully by next summer we can start putting boots on the ground up here and start getting this thing going. That'd be awesome. We've been talking about it for a long time. Everybody's ready to go.
But the project's footprint extended into the Yakima Nation's ceremonial sites and landscape. The development also raised concerns about the impact on the habitat of pronghorn sheep and ferruginous hawks, which are a threatened species. As the permitting process wound through the Washington Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, other residents in the Tri-Cities organized against it.
Tri-City C.A.R.E.S has had a number of concerns with this project from the very beginning.
Tri-Cities C.A.R.E.S didn't feel as if residents were included in the early stages of the project and were concerned about habitat impacts and the changes to the wide-open vistas homeowners were accustomed to. Dave Sharp is the vice president of the group.
You wouldn't see them directly behind us, but off to my right, there's a high ridge, and there are will be four prominent turbines installed. The bases will be about 1,000 feet taller than where we're standing, and the turbines will be 500 to 675 foot taller than that. So it would be 1,500 feet taller than we are, about just a little bit over a mile away.
In April 2024, after testimony from Tri-City C.A.R.E.S, tribes, environmentalists, and scientists, the Energy Site Council rejected the original proposed wind project, instead requesting 2-mile buffer zones around any hawk nests, which would cut the number of windmills permitted in half. Governor Inslee swiftly sent council members back to find a way to approve the project without cutting the energy output so drastically. He said it was urgent to find ways to fill the void that will come when natural gas is phased out by 2045. The Site Council came back in September 2024 with a recommendation that brought back the project's originally proposed size and energy output. But they kept buffer zones for the ferruginous hawk, limiting them to about half a mile, with the option to increase to 2 miles on a case-by-case basis. Inslee approved the latest proposal in October of 2024. By December, Yakima Nation, Tri-City C.A.R.E.S, and Benton County filed lawsuits to stop the project from going forward. Their reasons for suing, everything from the impacts to Yakima's sacred landscape to homeowner property values and impacts on the agricultural industry. The lawsuit highlights just how complicated the process of getting homegrown wind energy can be, and the conflict between impacts on the local community and clean energy for the future statewide.
Behind me, behind all that fog, is the Pacific Ocean.
It isn't just wind energy on land that is facing opposition. Offshore wind is in the early stages of exploration off the coast of Washington.
Offshore wind in particular is actually perfect.
Alla Weinstein is founder and CEO of Trident Winds, a deep-water wind exploration company that is proposing a wind farm about 50 miles off the coast of Grays Harbor and Pacific counties.
Come 2030, 2035, we're going to need a lot more energy. Plus, the offshore wind is available on the west side, which is where most of the demand is. It's not in eastern Washington, it's in western Washington. So you have a resource off the coast that is matching the demand curve, and the resource is very well matching that curve. And it's available on the side of the state where it needed the most.
The project would supply about 2,000 megawatts of clean energy, enough to power about 800,000 homes. The Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is ultimately the agency that will issue any leases for offshore wind in Washington state. Offshore wind farms have been around since 1991. Most are found along the coasts of Europe and East Asia. There are 2 operational wind farms off the Atlantic coast. But the water off Washington state is deep, drops off quickly, and the waves are longer and larger, making it more complicated to design and build floating platforms. And that's not the only difference from the East Coast. Washington state in particular has unique tribal concerns.
Our primary concerns is what it might do to the overall ecosystem. The Makah tribe, we're ecosystem-based managers, and that's not being looked at.
T.J. Green is chairman of the Makah tribe, one of the 20 Washington tribes with treaty-protected fishing rights.
What hasn't happened in the offshore wind process is inclusion of tribal authorities, sovereign tribal interests. We're resource trustees with everything that is out there in the ocean, and the federal government has a trust responsibility to uphold those interests of tribes, especially treaty tribes of the Northwest, and the process doesn't do that at all right now.
The tribes are asking the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to halt discussions on any offshore wind development until tribes' concerns can be addressed. The letter describes offshore wind as a newly developing industry with potential impacts that aren't yet understood.
Do you think there's any way that offshore wind and tribes can coexist?
It's unknown if offshore wind and tribes can coexist right now, and that's some of the basis of why we're calling for a halt on the process. We need to answer some of these questions. We need to do some of the research and studies so we can know the answer to that question.
It's the same sentiment heard from coastal, recreational, and commercial fishermen.
I think it would cause irreparable harm to our commercial and recreational fishing industry here. And they are already severely regulated in order to protect fish stocks and make sure that our fish stocks are sustainable. And a lot of them operate on a financial edge.
Former director of the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, Phil Anderson, is a commissioner for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. He also owns a charter fishing and birding business in Westport.
If offshore wind projects are put here and it causes economic harm to our commercial and recreational fishery, they don't have a lot of room. They're not making a lot of profit.
Weinstein says Trident's plan won't include any treaty-protected waters.
No way.
But it is possible that transmission lines bringing wind power to shore could pass through tribal land. She says that any wind turbine projects would need to work within the unique restrictions of the Washington coastline, and the tribes should be involved in any discussions with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management.
Tribes are sovereign governments, so they need and they have and they should have direct access to the federal government as well, because they want to have government-to-government consultation. But in my mind, the consultation is not what they need. They need participation.
It's been more than 2 years since Trident first issued an unsolicited lease proposal to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for developing offshore wind. With opposition facing any potential projects, there are more hurdles to come before any lease moves forward.
We'll go ahead and move on to the next item in our agenda, the State Energy Strategy and Electrification. We'll bring up Austin from the Department of Commerce.
But another scenario for meeting energy needs came up at a recent Senate Energy Committee meeting, one that focused on looking instead to other states to fill the void.
Washington must nearly double its electricity by 2050 under the electrification scenario. Building these resources in-state is not necessary. A more reliable and productive resource portfolio includes wind from the Rocky Mountains and solar from the Southwest. The lower relative cost of these out-of-state resources limits the growth of new renewable capacity in-state.
So while wind power over water and land winds its way through permitting and leasing processes, Washington State could eventually end up looking elsewhere for nearly half of its clean energy by 2050. At the start of the 2025 legislative session, minority Republican lawmakers submitted bills that would reduce the governor's authority to approve solar and wind energy projects in Washington state going forward. Those bills were in direct response to former Governor Jay Inslee's influence in getting the Energy Facility Siting Evaluation Council to approve the full scope of the Horse Heaven Hills wind turbine project. One piece of legislation would remove the governor from the process. The other would require approval from county and tribal governments on any future clean energy projects. Well, while tribes make it clear they want a seat at the table regarding state and federal clean energy projects, they are also taking their own steps to move toward clean energy.
Wayne Lloyd. My title is Building Department Director for the Nisqually Tribe.
When Wayne Lloyd started working for the Nisqually Tribe 5 years ago, the number of solar projects went through the roof.
We've done 3 solar projects so far that are completed at the tribe. We have about 5 more in the works right now.
You'd probably be surprised to hear what job Lloyd had before coming to Nisqually.
Ironically enough, I came from the coal-fired power industry. I worked for the largest manufacturer of boilers in the whole world and traveled all over the place constructing coal-fired power plants.
The last of Washington state's coal-fired power plants needs to close by the end of 2025.
That's been my bread and butter for most of my career, but as you've seen, most of those are getting shut down these days, and so I decided I had to refocus my efforts.
Lloyd was already looking into renewable energy on his own when he began working for the tribe.
I really started looking into clean renewable energy. Solar, I put it on my house, and then I decided, hey, this stuff works, let's bring it to the tribe.
The tribe has completed 3 solar projects so far and are planning 5 more.
Here at the tribe, energy sovereignty is the main goal. My goal is to be 100% off-grid within 10 years. It's a big goal, but I think it's achievable.
Next year, they hope to install a microgrid.
The microgrid can take up to 8 different energy inputs, which could be hydro, wind, solar, grid, you name it. And then it takes the energy, converts it into hydrogen. It feeds supercapacitors, which store energy. So we're able to make our solar energy in the daytime, store it, and then run off of the stored energy at nighttime. So it just totally makes sense. The only byproduct of that is clean water and oxygen. So there's no emissions other than oxygen and water.
Nisqually hopes to serve as a model for other tribes and the rest of the state on how to become energy independent, one solar panel at a time.
It's good for the environment and it saves you money. Why would you not want to do that?
While the research around wind, solar, and nuclear energy has been around for years, there is still significant work to be done in terms of bringing it to full scale, as well as developing the technology to store energy for future needs. But a new facility at the federal Pacific Northwest National Laboratories hopes to change that. A visit to the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories in Richland, Washington feels a bit like traveling to another world. With about 4,000 employees, the federal research facility has some of the top scientists, engineers, and researchers in the nation. It also has its own storied history in connection to the nearby Hanford nuclear site. Employees here have spent decades developing technologies to safely clean up radioactive waste that Hanford produced to fuel the atomic bomb during World War II. But on this mid-August morning,
All right, 1, 2, 3.
the focus is on the future, not the past. Dignitaries from the other Washington and this one gather for a ceremonial ribbon cutting before the heat of the day sets in. They are celebrating the opening of the Grid Storage Launchpad, a $75 million national research and development facility aimed at developing technologies for next-generation grid energy storage.
This is a one-stop shop for developing, testing, validating, refining, and finalizing energy storage technologies.
Jeremy Twitchell is a senior energy analyst at the laboratory and says it is a place developers from all over the country can come to work.
The services that we'll be doing at GSL, you can find elsewhere in the country, but they're spread out. What we've done here is we've taken all of those key services, those key things you need to build a new battery, and we've put them under one roof.
The hope is that by having the research tools in one place, it speeds along the development process.
We have the ability to look inside them at an atomic level and understand what's going on so that we can make refinements as needed. Then ultimately test those in a way, put them through the services that they would ask to be provided in an actual grid setting, with the end goal of when someone walks out of GSL, they will have a technology that has been validated and proven and is ready to go.
Part of the work includes figuring out how to safely design energy storage and connect it to a grid that would deliver it to communities.
Today, what we're looking at is how do we use storage to take the energy from the sun, the energy from the wind, and store up energy and apply that energy in ways that balance the system 24/7 at the speed of electrons zinging through wires.
Gene Rodriguez is the Assistant Secretary for Electricity for the U.S. Department of Energy. He's hoping what happens in Washington state can have an impact throughout the country and the world.
What we're celebrating today is we're open for business now, and you're going to see inventors and innovators from across the world bringing their technologies right here to Washington state to test out in all kinds of real-world grid operating conditions.
It starts and runs just like a generator.
So the important work begins today.
We did the first capture of carbon in Washington state and injected it into deep basalt right here in our own neighborhood.
A lot has changed in the 30 years since Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Manager Dennis Stiles joined the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. 2 decades ago, the focus was on figuring out carbon capture and how to safely store it underground.
Those technologies are becoming very close to commercially viable, thanks to 20 years of hard work. I think one of the things that has really changed in those intervening 20 years is we're starting to see a much more rapid transition of the generating mix away from coal and natural gas toward more and more renewable energy.
Stiles says the federal government and the private sector can work together to solve future energy problems.
Industry can build quite quickly if they see the market and if the technology is ready, and I think that's where we feel like we come in, is to help make sure that the technology is ready, that we've done the right kind of research and demonstrations to de-risk the technology so that developers can have the confidence that they can go out and build quickly at scale.
The celebration at the opening may be premature, but the scientists and researchers here know exactly what they are trying to accomplish and have their sights set on that goal.
Energy storage has grown faster than any other type of generation except solar. So faster than wind, faster than gas, faster than anything else except solar. But virtually all of that is lithium-ion. Lithium-ion is a wonderful technology, but it is constrained in that it's generally only good up to about 4 hours. Once you go beyond 4 hours, the ability of storage, the ability of lithium-ion to meet those needs is limited. It starts to be reduced. So what we need are new technologies that can provide those longer durations, that can meet the type of use cases we have in the future.
Finally, whether it is with wind, solar, nuclear, or next-generation grid technology, will the state's workforce be ready when projects need to be built? We put that question to the business manager of the Electrical Workers Union in Tacoma. Tim O'Donnell says the workforce is ready, but the projects haven't happened as fast as the union would like. One of their legislative goals is to lobby Congress to speed up the permitting process for clean energy work.
I think we're behind the 8 ball on getting the new projects moving. Our grid is maxed out, so we do need to move forward immediately on getting new projects for power going immediately.
Washington state lawmakers have passed legislation in recent years aimed at making sure that new clean energy projects are sited in an efficient and sustainable way. Some legislators have expressed the need to do more to speed along projects, but want to make sure there is a process for including federally recognized tribes in projects that impact them. As time goes by and the state's clean energy goal looms closer, there is increasing urgency. There is the question of how much a changing climate and increased technology demands will have on the clean energy supply. And there are concerns and questions from those impacted by projects in their backyards, as well as other unknowns, including the impact the Trump administration may have on any current and future renewable energy projects. In his first day in office, President Trump declared a national energy emergency and issued sweeping orders to increase oil and gas output. He signed an executive order to halt offshore wind energy lease sales and pause approval of permits and loans for both offshore and onshore wind projects on federal lands. And he withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, the landmark international climate deal that aims to limit the warming of the Earth. For now, from Washington State, thank you for watching.